Welcome to the Hope and Wholeness Podcast, where we empower people to seize the day and flourish in life. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Duckworth, and I'm thrilled to have you aboard. I'm a disciple of Jesus, psychologist, husband, father, coach, real estate investor, and passionate mountain biker, and I'm here to walk alongside you. My mission? To infuse hope and foster wholeness into every aspect of your life. Each episode will give you a bird's eye view of authentic discussions on real life issues, followed by practical suggestions. Let's tackle your toughest questions and embark on this journey together. Well, thank you guys all for joining us. I'm Dr. Ryan, and today I have a good friend of mine here, April Minitry, Dr. April Minitry. She's also a psychologist. So her and I have been connecting here for the last couple of years, just kind of on and off. You've been all over the country in the past few years, but you are in Michigan for this week.
I am.
So I made sure I got an hour of her time. And you guys, we have a great conversation in store. We've been trying not to have this conversation prior to having recording devices on because it's so good. It's going to even be a little bit risky. And so if some of you are a little bit, uncomfortable with some of the stuff we're talking about, that's totally okay. Stick with us. It's good to be uncomfortable sometimes. It's okay to have people with some different perspectives. I know, April, you and I kind of align on a lot of things, but the topic that we're going to talk about today is really kind of this political, cultural climate that we have in our country right now and in our communities, in our homes, even in our families. And April and I are going to have a conversation about it that I think is going to be really helpful for you guys. But we're also going to give you a lot of practical stuff like we always do. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today is the results of this election, how people are coping with that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So April, do you want to start with kind of like, I know that you have this survey and some kind of thoughts on what is happening
Yes.
in our
And
country.
so I think you had already talked to me about maybe addressing this topic even before the election happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I was noticing some data that was coming in. There was a poll that was done by Gallup, and that was surveying people before the election. And they discovered, regardless of who people were planning to vote for, 68% of people, so 2/3, had some fear about what would happen if their candidate didn't win.
Right.
So that says it's across both sides.
Yep.
People are experiencing fear. And I think a lot of people, even post-election, right? Half the country did not get their first choice. And so I think a lot of people are expressing concern about that and concern about the direction. And I think there's a lot of anxiety for people related to this topic of politics. And even those who might be happy with the election results, there can be anxiety about, but how do I be in the room with somebody and how do I be in conversation and maybe in relationship with somebody who thinks differently than I did or voted differently than I did? I think regardless of who you voted for, recognizing there were 70 million people who were thinking differently and voted differently than you. So how do I navigate those relationships? I think that's a part of it too.
Yeah, that's huge. And I also liked the survey that you sent to me because it also showed that a lot of the top issues that people are concerned about are vastly different. Absolutely. And so where there's a decent amount of judgment going on for people who maybe voted differently than you, my philosophy is always that there's a lot of good people out there who want good things, but we're actually paying attention to totally different issues a lot of the time. You want to say a little bit about that?
Well, I'll just kind of break it down. What they did is they asked people on kind of both sides and said, hey, what are the top 5 number one, the top 5 number one, the top 5 issues,
Yes.
Most important top priorities for you in this election cycle. And so people from both sides answered that. And the thing that struck me, there was not a single issue that was in common among the top 5 for Republicans and top 5 for Democrats. They were having different conversations about completely different issues, right? And I think one of the other things we have to watch, especially in the age of social media with the algorithms, is being in an echo chamber where we're only talking to people who share our worldview, who share like, oh yeah, those are my important issues too, right? And the algorithm learns you. They know what you watch. They know what you like. And they're going to send you more of the same. And so you could find yourself being completely blindsided that people are like, you mean not everybody thinks like this? You mean other people This is not what's important to me is not even important to them, and they think
Right.
this is important. I don't think
Right.
that's important. But if we're in that echo chamber, then we're not getting that exposure to
Yeah.
be like, oh, okay, yeah. There's just we're not even having the same conversation.
Right. Right.
We're talking about different issues.
Yeah. And I like to talk about this concept that you're kind of referring to here, which is group polarization. And social media feeds right into that. The concept of group polarization is when you get a group of people together and they all maybe start believing kind of somewhat similarly, but at the end of a discussion, they all are far more entrenched in a more extreme belief than what the group as a whole began with. And this is what's happening on social media. This is what is happening even potentially in people's groups of friends
Right.
or in churches.
Right.
And we're getting together and we're ending up with more extreme conclusions. We're more staunch and more entrenched in our ways than what we would have been naturally by ourselves.
Correct. And we're all agreeing with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things, so I have conversations with my father. He's a speaker in the leadership space. He talks about the exponential mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we talk about is we need to turn our me to we. And we need to be careful about uniting a group of people around our disdain for another group of people.
Yes.
And so when that happens, when we get together with a group of people that we agree with, it's really easy. We all are kind of feeding into each other and yeah, that's right. And how often does it turn into, and they are wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand. And
Right.
so there's this us versus them piece that
Mhm.
happens. That's that polarization is part of it. Yes,
Yeah.
it goes to even then more extremes, but it's that polarization that happens as opposed to saying, we as Americans have this vision for our nation. We as Americans, we all agree human rights are important.
Yes.
Right? Now we can get into the
Yeah.
whose rights are we talking about and what's the expression of that, but that's
Mhm.
we have this common ground even if we have different ways of looking at it. So how much can we shift the conversation to say we instead of an us versus them?
Yeah, for sure. And it's so anxiety producing when we have differences right now, when people are different. And I think that there are people who, from my perspective, I can definitely relate and empathize to people who are in some minority groups of people who feel very anxious about the next 4 years. And I think that there would be some people in different groups very anxious about the next 4 years if the results of the election had come a different way, because we are concerned about legitimate things. We're concerned about the rights of people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happening is we are that's becoming a source of fear and anxiety that is now expressing itself in kind of anger, disdain, disconnection, and division
Mm-hmm.
in families, friendships, churches, all over the place.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we're seeing, I think some people are feeling powerless, right? This thing happened, and even if I cast my vote, it didn't impact the large picture, or if it had gone the other way, it could have. The shoe could have been on the other foot, and
Right.
so people are feeling powerless. One path of that is kind of a depression, despair, anxiety path. I think another path that you see oftentimes when people are presenting as mad, it's really covering up the sad,
Yeah.
right? And so anger is an empowering emotion. So I want to feel better, so I'm going to get riled up and get angry, right? Because
Yep.
that feels empowering, and yet it's not necessarily helping people come to a place of peace. It's not necessarily promoting peace within the community or the conversation that we're
Mhm.
having, online. And so I think you're right. It's an anxiety provoking place
Yeah.
to be. And part of the anxiety, I think, comes from we do want to preserve harmony, right?
Yep.
We're wired for relationship. Then, especially if you have any people pleasing kinds of things, like,
Mhm.
oh, they're not
Yep.
happy with me.
Yep.
Mayday, this is not good. Like, oh no, we want to have harmony. But by the way, the idea of harmony is that we might have different notes, but they're not in conflict with each other.
Yeah.
It's not the same as unison to
Yeah.
have harmony.
Yeah, I think that that's what it is so uncomfortable is when you don't have it in unison, when you
Mhm.
don't have agreement, especially about hot button topics
Mhm.
that are going around today. So I wanted to kind of address that a little bit.
Sure.
My philosophy is very much to really tolerate and be okay. That really doesn't bother me near as much as it used to be around people who believe differently than me. especially when I have an in-person connection with them,
Mhm.
I can see their heart. I can see that they care. I don't care, what political or whatever background you come from. But there is some stuff going around on social media, particularly that I see that really saddens me. A
Mhm.
lot of people are posting things and saying things to directly to people and just generically they're saying, how can you be a Christian and
Mhm.
fill in the blank?
Mhm.
How can you be a Christian and do this or vote for
Mhm.
that person?
Mhm.
Both sides.
Right.
And other people are saying things like, hey, if you're going to stand by and not stick up for the rights of babies,
Mhm.
then just go ahead and unfriend me.
Mhm.
And then other people are saying, hey, if you're going to stand by and watch transgender rights get trashed,
Mhm.
then you're no friend of mine.
Mhm.
And this really, really saddens me. I think that a lot of these people who post those things, um, many of them I've talked to. I'm friends with them on social media, and so in some ways I'm like surprised, in other ways I'm not. But
Mhm.
I'm kind of wondering, what happened to this? Hey, we can be different, we can be diverse, and we
Mhm.
can have different perspectives and be okay. Now all of a sudden it's not okay.
Mhm.
Now that people's rights are involved.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to I'll say a couple of things. One is that we've got to recognize we all agree that rights are important. With the issues you mentioned, well, it
Mhm.
depends on whose rights we're talking about. Are we talking about the right of a transgender male to go into a women's bathroom or locker room or play women's sports? Are we talking about the rights of the biological females who want to be able to go into a bathroom or a locker room or play sports without a biological male present, right? If
Mm.
I'm competing for scholarships and I'm female and now I'm having
Mhm.
to compete in sports
Yeah.
against biological men, like did my rights get violated? So there's two different parties that have
Yep.
rights. The same thing with the unborn, right? Are we
Mhm.
talking about the rights of a woman? I think generally speaking, it depends on how you ask the question, right? If I ask the question, "Hey, do you think a woman should have the right to make choices about her own body?" I think most of us would say yes.
Yeah, there's a select few maybe who wouldn't, but yes, the vast majority are gonna say yes.
Right? The majority would say yes. And then there's also this piece of, and isn't it a good thing to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves? So the
Mhm.
rights of the unborn.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're running into is we all agree that rights are important.
Mhm.
We have two different groups of people that are being positioned in a way that there's conflict between
Yeah.
this person's rights and that person's rights.
Yeah.
And so being able to pull back this conversation to a place that says, okay, can we calmly discuss that?
Yeah.
Can I not demonize or vilify somebody
Mhm.
who has an alternate perspective? Let me listen and
Right.
understand. I think this is where that phrase "be curious, not furious." So let me understand what that's like for you. I think that's a way that we can open up dialogue for understanding and maybe arrive potentially at a way of saying, "Oh, is there another solution that would allow both parties to get what they actually
Yeah.
are interested in here?" Like, I don't think those conversations happen if we're afraid to
Right.
do it because we're afraid of being unfriended
Vilified.
or
Yes.
vilified or whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. And so that's a part of how it's happening.
I think that one thing that I want maybe to give some of you who are listening today is this kind of take a step back and look down on a conversation between two people who have a very different perspective. Our culture is fostering this us versus them, as we've mentioned, and this polarizing effect. And so our response to somebody who believes differently in terms of pro life is to go so far pro choice. And our response to somebody who's so far pro choice is to go even further pro life. And
Mhm.
the fact of the matter is that the line at where an unborn baby's rights end and a mother's rights begin, it's not a line. They are intimately connected for at least 9 months. For the most part,
Mhm,
even after
mhm,
that, our rights
mhm.
are connected and they overlap. I like to tell people about the when we had COVID, it was a whole mask situation.
Mhm.
And I remember that I was a little bit slow to the draw as to determining what I might do as a psychologist in my office, mask or no mask.
Mhm.
And in our office is mask or no mask. And we had people thinking differently about that. And I was just stunned because it hadn't ever been in my face so much before of like,
No pun intended.
of like, okay, wait, I have a right to not wear a mask. I have a right for other people around me to respect my safety and wear a mask, right? Don't I have that right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
and it's true. So I could respect a person by wearing a mask. Another person might feel like they're disconnected from me and not respected if I wear a mask.
Correct.
And so
What does it mean to them?
exactly. And so I can tell you what I did, and what I did was basically, hey, I don't really care about masks. You want me to wear a mask in my session? I'll be happy to wear one. You don't want one? Sweet. Let's not wear
Mhm.
masks.
Yeah.
But I totally understand people who are much more, have a stronger opinion about that. But I think what I want you to see is that there is no line. There is
Mhm.
no right answer. And what I think culturally people want us to do is we want to draw a line. Lines are easier.
Mhm.
Black and white is just easier. If we just have a line, just tell us what to do. Are we on this side or this side? The government drew a line and said to wear masks. I forget all the details of it, but
Mhm.
it's like that was a line. And people appreciated that. Some people didn't, but
Some
a lot of
people
people
didn't, yeah.
appreciated that there was a line. Now we know who's crossing it. Now we know who's not,
Right. Right.
and it's just not that simple. The government, I kind of give them a little bit of a grace. I don't love government off most of the time, but I give them a little bit of grace here. It's like, hey, they had to do something. They had to make a decision. They knew they weren't going to please everybody.
They made it clear.
Yeah.
And yet I think there was something, what you just said was something really, really brilliant. And I think it's actually a key to this whole thing. You said, you know what? I'm going to be good either way. I'm going to practice preferring the other. What makes you feel comfortable? What makes you feel safe? And so whenever we have the opportunity to meet people where they're at, instead of having to advance our own agenda, right now I recognize there are times where you might ask me to do something that would be compromising my moral convictions. And so it would not be kind to either of us for me to allow that to happen. And yet wherever we have that ability to say, you know what, I'm going to meet you where you are. And to do that, that's actually practicing, if I can say it this way, the law of love of I'm gonna put the other first. I'm gonna respect the other person and take their preferences into consideration. The more that we can do that, I think we're also filling, in a sense, the emotional bank accounts, one another's, right? So that when we do hit a bump and it's like, oh, I actually need a concession here, you already know if I've treated you that way, you already know that I care about you. There's a track record there of me preferring you, and your likelihood of being understanding when I say, hey, I really wish I could, and yet that would be something that would feel wrong on the inside of me. I'm going to ask for some grace in this particular situation. If I've given you the benefit of the doubt and I've given you consideration again and again and again, you're more likely to be receptive.
Yeah.
Because you know that I care about you.
Yeah. I think that this kind of brings us in this direction where we really get our panties in a bunch when we can't control other people.
Dang it!
Isn't that a thing?
Yeah. I thought you were going to teach me how to do the psychology mind tricks too.
Yeah.
And it's exactly that, right? It's the fear and not being able to control other people.
And before we totally jump on to that topic, I realize that, what I do, when I prefer somebody who, if they want a mask, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine. Not everybody has the same conviction that I do about not caring really about masks. I think, though, if I can speak to the believers here, though, I think that we need to remember who we are and who we're supposed to be like, who we can be like, and the humility that comes along with that. A lot of Christians during that period of time were saying, I'm not going to bow to the government and wear a mask. And I was kind of wondering, well, I suppose that's good, but that's causing you to not humble yourself before man. And I think that in some ways we really miss some opportunities to have grace and love in that, because and not everybody has to have zero fear of COVID and stuff like that. But I remember my wife and I saying like, hey, listen, we're not going to live our lives in fear of COVID, and therefore we're going to respect what other people want to do, and we're going to respect. We may not even agree. We wish you didn't have any fear of COVID and you could not wear a mask, but we want to respect that. We also want to respect the logic of, hey, you know what? Disease or COVID is contagious. You know what I mean? Like, let's not just because. Okay, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I want to do this. we're stuck. I'm stuck on COVID. The
Do we need to unpack
Yeah,
this,
I know.
Ryan?
So one time a pastor was speaking, and I wish I could give the credit here where it's due, but he said, "Do we fear the devil?"
Mm.
Or I think we should fear the devil. I think I said it in my head. I'm like, "What? Are you kidding me? We should fear the devil? We should have no fear of the devil. We have power over him. We've been given
Mhm.
victory." I'm like, "What is he gonna say next? Because he better watch it."
Mhm. Right?
You know?
Right?
And then he's like, "I don't fear the devil in a sense of or no, I think he said respect. I think that might have been the word. I respect the
Mm.
devil. That's what he said. I'm like, how do you respect the devil? I don't respect the
Mm.
devil, what he's about, what he does. But he's like, no, I respect the devil like I would respect an enemy who
Mhm.
isn't just an ant that I can squash.
Mm.
He's like, I respect the devil enough to suit up every day
Mhm.
and take the sword of the spirit and the belt of the truth and the breastplate of
Mhm.
righteousness. I respect the devil enough in battle to put on those things. I know I have victory,
Mhm.
but I have to respect him enough to be prepared to do what I need to do to defeat him.
Right.
And I think that in some ways, I'm going to bring this back to COVID, is that in a situation like mask wearing, which was very controversial, and there's not exactly a right answer. Pardon me, all you guys who believe there's a right answer.
Mhm.
There's
On both sides.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that in some ways we have to suit up and not fear the devil or other people's reactions. But because we don't have to fear, instead of taking this macho stance, we have to take this humble stance.
Right.
We have to love other people and do that how Jesus did. Get out on their level and meet them
Right.
where they're at, like
Right.
you said. So
Right. It's not
thanks for
so much
sharing
about
that.
well, and I think what you're getting at is it's not so much about the outcome. It's not about what you do or don't do. It's about why you do it. And are you being motivated by love? Or are you
Mhm,
being motivated by fear?
mhm.
And we know that perfect love drives out fear. So
That's
if
right.
we have
Yep.
love as our motivation, then that's what counts. And then the other piece of this is like fast forward 1,000 years from now, this is not going to matter. We're going to be standing
Oh
before
no!
God.
Oh no! This is going to matter. Trump is going to completely change things 1,000 years from now. Okay.
We'll get to that later. We'll get to that later. But I think to say like, hey, when I'm standing before
Yeah.
God, what's going to count is what was in my heart.
Mhm.
What's going to count is how I treated other
That's right.
people. What's going to count
That's
is
right.
how well did I love. And it's more the motivation of your heart. That's what's going to be eternal, more so than even the action. you
That's
took.
right. That's right. I've been talking about that a lot on this podcast, actually, the last couple episodes of what's really going to last,
Mhm.
what's really important, because we get all tied up and tied down by our
Mhm.
anxiety and by the things of this world. I mean, it happened this morning. I had to give Candy a hug because we were getting all our panties all in a bunch because I was running late for school and she was running late for Bright, and I had to give her a hug and be like, "Okay, baby, guess what? It's okay. Nobody's gonna remember if we were a little late when we get to heaven."
Right? Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
And
but it's how we treat each other
that's
in this
right.
moment.
That's right. How we treat our children. They have
Mhm.
eternal spirits.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to live forever.
Mm-hmm.
And this has an impact on
Right. And so seeing the way that we're having these conversations, and I think that's one of the things to kind of bring it back to the political piece, right? Because there's so much where people are feeling powerless and to say, but what do I have power over? I have power about how I respond in this moment. I have power about how I treat other people.
Mhm.
I have power over the thoughts that I think. I have power over the words that I say. And I have
Mhm.
power over how I show up in relationship.
Mhm.
And I know this is something, you and I have talked about even outside of this conversation, this notion of being a powerful person, right? Danny Silk does a brilliant job of unpacking this.
Love you, Danny Silk.
Yes. Keep your love on. Is
Yes.
that a message for America
Yes,
or what?
I know,
Keep your love
I
on.
know.
But he talks about being a powerful person in this way. So if we disagree on something and I can't be happy when you're holding another position, I've actually essentially given you the power of my happiness.
Yep.
I've given it away because unless you do the thing or say the thing or think the thing or whatever, like, then I'm not okay.
Right.
Whoa. Hold on. Time out. I would like to take my power back.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would like to be a powerful person, and I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
Even if you're free to be wrong.
Yeah. So let's say that again. So when your happiness or your comfort is dependent on somebody else's opinion, you have given them responsibility and control over your feelings,
Your
over your
well-being.
well-being.
Yeah. And in
Wow.
this political climate, chances are many of us have been tempted to give our power away to people we've
Right.
never even met.
Right. So again, for those of you who are political, I know I have friends who are like involved in politics, like
Mhm,
running and stuff. And so I know that this means something a little bit different to them. But if I
mhm,
think for the majority of us out there, let's remember what we're responsible for.
mhm,
You're responsible for you. On my best day, I can really only control myself.
mhm,
On my best day.
mhm, mhm, mhm. By the
And
power of the Holy
that's
Spirit.
right. That's right. So that's where I want my focus to be.
Right.
And I think that it's good to have passions.
Mhm,
It's good to do good work in
mhm,
your communities. It's good to run for office and to
mhm,
do good. Again, especially locally, everybody who's running on both sides, they're trying to do what they think is best.
mhm,
I guess there's some self-serving people out there I know on certain boards and things like that. But for the most part, I think that we can say that people are trying to do what they think is right
mhm,
for a community.
mhm.
And that's good.
It
Do it.
is.
Do what you can do
Right.
in your sphere of influence.
Right. And don't be pulled off sides. Right. I mean, I think
Mhm.
that's because I really, so our fight is not against flesh and blood.
That's right. Let's
And
say that again.
our fight is not against flesh and blood, right? And so if you think about it almost like a football analogy, right? So you've got these opponents that are there at the line of scrimmage, and the enemy is just trying to get you to jump off sides. He's
Oh,
trying
I
to
like that
get you
analogy.
to like, oh, okay. And he jukes you, and then you're like, and then there's a penalty flag, and you're like,
Right.
well, dadgummit, that was a setback.
That makes total sense because that's the only way he can win, right?
Right.
Is by
Right.
cheating.
Right. Pretty much. Right. He goads us. He tries to goad us. He tries to
Mhm.
provoke us, et cetera, et cetera. And so to recognize, wait a minute. No. If I recognize the spiritual dynamic, then now I recognize actually my fight is not with this person. It's not with this person. It may have a human face on it. And I'll share something. So I got this from the upper room, and then Holy Spirit kind of unpacked it for me. They talked about weaponized blessing.
Okay.
And the way that then, okay, as Holy Spirit was unpacking it for me, he said it this way. He said, the devil fights dirty. He uses human shields.
Okay.
So you perceive you are under attack, and you look, where is that attack coming from? And you see a human.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that that's the whole story, right?
Mhm.
And behind that human is a spirit that
Mhm.
is attacking.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe using that human as a puppet, maybe by the way, just creating a filter so that when that
Yeah.
person is speaking something that they're completely well intended, but the way you're hearing it is
Right.
that. And so the idea of weaponized blessing is that if you can bless the person, that effectively moves them out of the way, and
Mhm.
then you can deal with the spirit behind it.
That's right.
And if you can't think of anything else to say good about that person,
Yep.
they're created in the image of God.
That's right.
So you bless the Imago Dei.
Yep.
You bless, this is a person that Jesus died for.
Yep.
They are created in his image. They have intrinsic value.
Mhm.
And you may be thinking in your head, as wrong as they may be.
Yep.
But Lord, hey, if they have not, if they're misguided, if they haven't seen the truth, should I not then speak blessing, Lord, that you would open their heart and open their eyes to receive your love, to receive truth. And then, by the way, I want to be careful of like, what am I praying? Would I pray that on myself? Yes, Lord, open my eyes and guide me in
Yes.
truth.
Yes.
Who among us does not want to
Yes.
be walking in the truth? And
Yep.
so when I do that, that moves them out of the way.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this applies so much, even for those who might be listening who are not believers. The you probably would love to convince everybody that women's rights are far more important than what they're making them out to be, and that they might even be working against them by what they're saying or doing.
Mm.
You want to convince them of that. You want them to know that, and a lot of times with good intentions.
Mhm.
And when we argue with that person,
Especially on social media.
especially on social media, when we go out of our way, and then when we argue and then they don't agree and they don't listen and they have all these other
So then we would
arguments.
disparage them, and that increases
Yes,
our chances of them saying yes.
exactly.
Oh, clearly, you've just insulted me. You must be right.
Right.
My respect for you just went through the roof. Yeah.
You're exactly getting at what I'm getting at. Let's remove that person. Let's remove that person. That person is not behind the spirit that wants to oppress women.
Correct.
That person is not the spirit that wants to abort babies. That spirit isn't a spirit of division. It's not a spirit, or I mean,
That person.
that person is not the spirit of oppression or division or
Mhm.
any of those things.
Mhm. Right.
It's the devil who is at work behind all of that. So let's spend our time and our energy instead of typing at people,
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
our hands still
Yes. Yes.
and take a much stronger, more powerful stance against what the enemy is trying to do in our world.
100%. 100%. And if we could join together, especially as the body of Christ,
Yeah.
against our common enemy
Mhm.
who's trying to bring division and
Mhm.
discord and oppression and the anxiety and fear and stress
Yeah.
and chaos and
Yeah.
all of those kinds of things, if we come together collectively against
Yeah.
those forces that are coming against us, then that'll probably
Yeah.
be more effective than getting
Yep.
at each other.
And I want to say one more thing, going a little bit back to just particular controversial issues. Historically, our democracy was built in a way so that opposing opinions could be heard
Mhm.
and that we'd make better decisions as a result of that.
Mhm.
So I think most of you would agree that women's rights and rights of unborn babies are both very important. We need to have people who are pushing for both of those things
Mhm.
and not be pushing against each other. We don't have to push babies down to raise women up. Women have been oppressed historically. We absolutely need to be working
Mhm.
on raising them up.
Mhm.
But we don't raise them up at the expense of babies. We don't raise them
Right.
up at
Or
the
or
expense
men.
of men. Yeah, that's true too. I mean, it's a matter of
Mhm.
we always aim for equality,
Mhm.
but as much as this is the ideal, and I think how God intended it, we're constantly kind of going like this.
And I think it's a shift of perspective from an adversarial, right? I mean, that's one of the names for Satan is
Yep.
the adversary,
hmm
right? And so this positioning of, well, if you win, then I lose, as opposed to in the kingdom, where do we find the win-win?
Yeah.
How do
Yep.
we, not us versus them, how do we win
Mhm.
together?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good stuff. So I think I wanted to say, I guess, one more thing about this concept of um, moral high ground. I think that we all like to think that we have the moral high
Mm.
ground. And we've already said a lot about this basically, but I want to make it even more clear. You know, is it our role as Christians to be that person who says, I have the moral high ground, this is right?
Golly, that sounds a lot like pride to me. And there's a delicate balance because there
Mhm.
is a piece of like, hey, I'm anchored in my convictions.
Right.
There is a piece of that. And yet to move forward in that from a place of humility,
Mhm.
again, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. What's the spirit behind it?
Yeah.
Is it a spirit of pride? Is it a spirit of humility? And people are going to feel that difference because it's going to come across in your tone. It's going to come across sometimes in your choice of words, but a lot
Mhm.
of it's going to be the energy
Yeah.
behind what you're doing.
Yeah. Um, I'm going to read this quote. Oh my goodness. What was the name of the pastor who
Ian Simpkins.
Okay, good. I can
Yes.
give credit to Ian Simpkins for
Yes.
this. Um, he was talking about loving our enemies and praying for people who we perceive as our enemies. And this was basically what he said we ought to do. And I feel like in some ways it speaks to the opposite of taking the moral high ground. He said, we are to pursue peace. And then this is the start of the quote. This is not passive. We are called to actively pursue peace. It means to pursue relationships with people who disagree with us, invite them to our table and sit at theirs. It means to seek peace with our opponents, not by avoiding the hard conversations, but entering them with humility, curiosity, and grace. It means refusing to dehumanize those we disagree with, but instead recognizing their dignity as people made in the image of God. You and I both said things that go right in that,
Mhm.
but that I think really
Mhm.
sums it up. Can you really go in and sit at somebody else's table
Mhm.
and tell them what you believe, what you think they ought to believe? Can that be done with humility, curiosity, and grace?
If it can't, then that old adage, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all.
Right.
Like if you're not able to do it in that spirit,
Yeah.
then maybe it's not time to to make that attempt yet.
Yeah.
Because I think there is that piece. And so I'm glad you brought up that for those who are interested, that's Ian Simpkins. He's at the Bridge Church in Nashville, Spring Hill, Tennessee. And that whole message that he gave was really
tremendous.
fantastic. And one of the things he talks about in there is not over-identifying with our political party.
Mhm.
And when we have a stronger identification with our identity in Christ than we do with a political party, that's how we say, okay, so my higher order thing is not to communicate, here are the policies or the way that I think you should think. My higher order priority, if my number one identity is my identity in Christ, then I want it to look and sound and feel like that. So it needs to be with love
Mhm.
and humility and curiosity and kindness.
Yep.
That's the most important thing that I'm doing, even if I am
Absolutely.
expressing an opinion.
Yep.
And anytime that we get that backwards and like, okay, I'm more entrenched in my political ideology and my ideology has become my identity,
Mhm.
then now if somebody threatens my ideology, my identity's been
threatening
threatened.
it.
I feel scared.
Yeah.
I try to take control, and that's where
Right.
we've seen plenty of that.
Right.
So being able to say like, hey, my ideology, political ideology is not my identity.
That's right. Yep. And Ian says this as well, is that if you relate more to your political affiliation than with your identity as a Christian and a child of God, that's idolatry.
Right.
That's
Right.
I mean, there's no other way to put that.
Right. But Bob Hamp says it this way: whatever organizes your life is your God.
Mhm.
And by the way, there can be really good things, right? So it could be, I mean, it could be good to be participating in the political process. But if that's what your life is organized around. By the way, I had that happen at one period in my life. Running had become my God. When I was training for my first marathon, I was eating, sleeping, everything was about running. And when I got an invitation, hey, do you want to go somewhere this weekend? It wasn't, oh, let me pray about that. It was, oh, let me check and see how many miles I have to do.
Goodness. I never thought of my calendar being my idol before.
Mm. Mhm. How do we build that calendar?
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
convicting when we're like, oh, okay, what has
Yeah,
been
I don't have
organizing
room
my
because
life,
my calendar says I'm doing this.
right?
I don't have room for God even. I don't have room for what he wants me to do, what he's going to call me to do today that's not on my schedule.
So whatever's organizing our life, and that doesn't mean, I mean, God can give you a schedule as a tool, but again, it's like, and goals even, right?
Yeah.
Goals are meant to serve us.
Yep.
If we end up serving our goal, I have organized my whole life around whether it was a business goal or a fitness goal or a relationship goal or whatever, like any whatever organizes your life is your God.
Yeah. So let's go back to this sitting at the table with people who are different from us.
Mhm.
So I think that if we go in there sharing our opinion, I ask, can we really do that from a humble, curious, graceful place? And I think oftentimes the answer is no. Not that our opinion doesn't have a place at a table
Mhm.
in a conversation with somebody else,
Mhm.
but I think my perspective on this is that when we share an opinion, maybe 90% of the time, especially political opinions, we're sharing it with the wrong goal.
Mhm.
Because the goal at that point is not curiosity, humility, and grace. The goal usually is actually our own comfort and our
Mhm.
own decrease in anxiety. We
Mhm.
are trying to find a connection with somebody else so that we're not so stressed out. And we get all upset about it and we think that they're stupid and that they don't know what they're talking about and they're
Mhm.
misguided and they've been blinded, because
Mhm.
they don't see things the way that I do. And we get really upset about it.
Mhm.
And I think that our attempt to convince them, especially in a one-on-one situation, is really more so that we can just relax.
Right. So if
It's not even an attempt at this person to right somebody's faulty thinking. I mean, if you were telling me you can't drive a car because as soon as you drive a car, you're going to get in an accident, I might try to logically help you,
Mhm.
ask you some good questions, help you
Mhm.
understand that maybe cars aren't quite so dangerous as what you think they are,
Mhm.
so that you can live a good life
Right.
that oftentimes requires driving.
Right?
That might be, but when I come at you arguing, trying to get you in your car, forcing you in your car,
Right. It's probably not going to work. And I think
that's so I don't have to drive you around.
right? So and so this whole idea, there's so many layers of things bouncing in my head.
Yeah.
So I mean, by the way, do you talk to somebody who's a fool in the Proverbs? Well, sometimes it is yes, you need to
That's right.
not let that go unchecked and you're supposed to set them straight. And then other times it's like, nope, you're going to be wasting your breath.
Right.
You're bringing up a really important point, which is, am I doing this actually out of love and service for them? And are they in a place to hear it? Or am
Yeah.
I doing it to meet some kind of need that I have? And it reminds me of something I heard from a coach once. She described it this way. That's like going to the hardware store for milk.
Mm,
It's
mhm.
not wrong that you want validation.
Right.
It's not wrong that you want somebody to see your point of view.
Right.
It's not wrong that you want that comfort and the harmony
Milk
of
is
like,
good.
right? Milk is good.
Yeah.
They just don't have a lot of it at the hardware store.
Right. You're going to get a lot more.
And so asking yourself when you're sitting across from this person, I think what you're bringing up is really brilliant. Like, let me ask, what's my goal here?
Mhm.
Is my goal to convince them?
Mhm.
And if so, why?
Right.
Why am I trying to convince them?
Right.
And by the way, am I going to the hardware store for milk?
Yeah.
What's the probability
Yes.
that this conversation is going to end in harmony?
Right. And 2 follow-ups to that is, are you being a good steward of your time and energy and resources at that point? Or are you wasting them? Because to me, I want to invest in people and relationships and conversations that, again, are going to have heavenly return on investment,
Right.
spiritual return on investment, something that is fruitful. These conversations, especially on social media, are not fruitful. There's no good fruit that comes from it. I see some people that I really respect spiritually on there, in my opinion, wasting their time and energy on an unfruitful conversation. Like, man, you could be having that conversation with a person who cares. Not saying that in a sarcastic, rude way, but like, I could have a conversation with a person who cares, and this might be a helpful conversation. My mom and I talk about politics quite a bit, actually. And we do a pretty good job, I think, of asking questions, trying to understand the other person's perspective, because it improves our insight. It sharpens us when we can ask questions. We provide some evidence, we ask some questions, we poke and we prod, and I think it makes us better. It's hard. Even with my mom, it is hard sometimes to have those types of conversations. But that's really what's needed. If you want to be sharpened, if you want to have a conversation that's going to influence somebody, think about the people who you have influence with, who you have enough respect and rapport with that you know that you could disagree with and still have a productive, fruitful conversation. I'm telling you what, that's who I'm going after. And a lot of those people are my clients. Not that I'm trying to convince them of something, but this is a meaningful, fruitful conversation where we have some mutual respect, we have rapport. I can ask a question and they're going to know I'm not just asking a question that I have the answer to. I'm literally just asking them to provide their perspective.
Because you have their best interest at heart, right? This is not something that's coming from selfish ambition, which I think James says opens the door to every evil thing. So maybe to be avoided there. And so again, operating from love. And the other thing that I would couple with that, Jesus batted 1,000 with this strategy. I say only what the Father is saying. I do only what the Father's doing. If I'm not hearing it from heaven, then I don't need to be saying it. And this is a humility piece here to say, I have my opinion.
Yeah.
That and $5 will buy you a cup of coffee. Maybe.
Yep.
And so like my opinion is not gospel truth. I'm willing to lay that down. I don't have to express my opinion. If I see myself, for those of us who are believers, if I see myself as an ambassador of the kingdom, I'm not speaking on my own authority. An ambassador doesn't get to go and just render their opinions.
Right.
They're speaking on behalf of the government that they represent.
That's right.
So let us speak on behalf of the kingdom government that we represent and only say what we have permission to say and recognize it's going to be okay if we don't say everything that we think.
That's right. And point out that there's a lot of gray area between ignore this fool, don't even waste your time on him, to be there for this fool, comfort him, give him the shirt off your back. A lot of gray area in between those two.
I'm going to do only what I see him doing. In this situation, he said, I want you to plug in here. I want you to invest. In this situation, he said, move on.
Yep. And we will judge our time and energy output by the fruit that it produces. This is good stuff. Do you have anything else that you really want to hit today, April?
I think we said we wanted to maybe land on some takeaways. So I would love for us to maybe kind of like, let's get to the practicals of like, what can we give folks in terms of takeaways?
Okay. All right, guys, here's our best whack at the takeaways. There's a lot.
And we welcome yours.
Yeah. I think that the biggest one for me is this quote is, if you want to do something active today, pursue a conversation, pursue a connection with somebody who you know disagrees with you. And be curious, be graceful, be respectful, and love them, and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's one practical thing for sure.
Yeah. I think connection is the key word there. To bring connection is the Trump thing. And I think with that, because I think there's two places. There's one place that anxiety happens, and that is, oh no, I'm not in control, and there are things happening that I don't agree with. And then the other one is, how do I navigate this
Mhm.
conversation with somebody else? And yet to come back to a place where we recognize, okay, what's my part?
Mhm.
And let me speak out, right? The power of death and life is in the tongue.
Yep.
So I would say that for me, one of the practical
Takeaway number
takeaways
2.
is to speak life,
Yep.
only what you sense God is saying
Yep.
that He wants to share. And I heard great advice years ago, and that was, don't say anything that you can't end with the phrase, and that's the way I want it.
Yes, I love that. So explain how that works.
So you wouldn't say, well, the whole world is going to hell in a handbasket, and that's the way I want it. Like,
Right.
probably not, right?
Mhm.
But to be able to say, like, hey, our country has been divided, but we have thrived through adversity
Mhm.
before. And we have come together through adversity before. And that's the way I want it.
Yeah.
Maybe you say, I can thrive no matter what.
Yeah.
And that's the way I want it.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go with that. Point number 3 takeaway is have hope.
Yes.
So your quote earlier, you said about the leading with hope.
Yes,
Say
yes,
that
yes.
again.
So I'm a huge fan of Steve Backlund's work, and he says this. He says, the one who has the most hope has the most influence.
So maintain hope, you guys. I think it's really easy. It's easy for me to look at where this world's going, to look at these two sides that really don't like each other right now, and I think, wow, we're really screwed up, and we're really messed up, and this just stinks. And I can't say that without ending it with, and that's the way I want it.
All right.
So
You got to keep
have
going.
hope, but God has it. His plan, His will be done, and His will can be done in my life, starting with me, the person I can control.
Right.
His will be done in my life, and that's the way I want it.
Right? and because things have been so crazy, more people are praying and
Mhm.
fasting. Like, that's happening, and that's the way I want it.
Yes.
Right? The enemy has been messing with our country, but I
Yep.
see God on the move, and that's the
Yep.
way I want it. All of this trouble that is being stirred up is driving people to their knees,
Yep.
and that's the way I
Yep.
want it. So having that's a hopeful perspective. The future will be better than the present.
Yep.
And I have the power to help make
Yeah.
it so. That's a good place to land, and that's the way I
Yeah.
want it.
So takeaway number 4 is be a powerful person. And what we mean by that is control yourself and
Mhm.
do a good job of it.
Mhm.
God's given each of you a calling. Even if you don't believe in God, if you're not a believer, you have a calling on your life. You have a purpose. If you're listening to this, I would imagine that if you've listened this far, like you are passionate about this, you have a calling, you have something good to do with your life. I say do it, because you can only control yourself. You can't control other people.
And please do stay in control of yourself. Don't give your power away to
Yes.
somebody else
Yep.
and let them pull you off sides. Maybe that's another
Yep.
takeaway, is don't get pulled off sides
Yep.
and give the power of your happiness away to somebody, especially somebody that you don't agree with,
Mhm.
and possibly somebody you've never even met.
Yeah.
Don't give the power of your happiness away.
Yep.
You can choose to be happy no matter the circumstance, and that's the way we want it.
That's right. That's right. All right, so that's 4 takeaways. Yeah, I like those takeaways. I think that's pretty much got it. I guess one more really practical one would be to, we talk a lot about speaking only what we hear the Father say. But even if you look at Jesus, He asked a lot of questions.
Mhm.
So I would highly recommend asking questions over making a statement of opinion or even fact. Can I put that in quotes?
Well, there are facts and there's truth. So which one are we talking about?
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
But so ratio of questions to facts,
Mm.
truth, opinions, in my opinion, should be at least 3 to 1, if not 5 to 1, especially if when you're building rapport, connecting with somebody, looking to understand them, because we're not threatened by what other people believe.
Mhm.
I don't want you to be threatened by what other people believe. I don't want you to feel unsafe because you're in the room with somebody who doesn't believe the same as you.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is possible. Some of you out there might be saying, like, I don't ever want to find myself in the room with someone who believes this or doesn't believe that I deserve the right to do fill in the blank.
Mhm.
Well, it's possible.
Mhm.
I actually have recently had a conversation with a therapist friend of mine from a racial minority, and this person has worked with clients who are even saying racist remarks in session.
Mm.
And he found a way to counsel them. He found a way to love them and to
Mhm.
move them towards their goals and not be offended or
Mhm.
insecure or up in arms, even discouraged. Some ways I'm like, man, how did you do that? I'd be
Right.
like, ooh. I
Right.
mean, he's got more security than I do in that department. But so guess what? You guys can do it,
Yeah.
especially with the power of the Holy Spirit.
Right. Well, and I think there's something you said really key in that, which is he sidestepped the offense.
Mm, mhm.
And that is the thing. So John Bevere has a whole book on the bait of Satan, right? It's offense. It's that being pulled
Yeah.
off sides. And it was really funny. And maybe I'll go ahead and share. I remember seeing something. The Lord spoke to me off of something I saw on TikTok. So there was this guy who had a porch pirate
Porch pirate.
who would come and steal packages, right? And so in the
Uh-huh.
days of, Arlo's and all those kind of stuff, you can tell who's come to your door and whatever. And so he had somebody that was stealing packages.
Wow.
Well, this guy, they messed with the wrong person. He was an engineer. And so he created this device, this little package, and he loaded it with like all of this like glitter stuff that would spray. He put fart spray in there
Oh, wow.
so that whoever would take this package, man, it would just blow up in their face. And so God said to me, he said, April, offense is like that package. Do not pick it up. If you pick up offense, you're going to unpack that. It is going to
Yeah.
make a mess. It's going to stink. Don't do that.
Yep.
And so to be able to say, I'm going to sidestep the offense, just like your friend did,
Mm-hmm.
say, my goal here is to love.
Mhm.
And if God's told us to love our neighbors and to love our enemies,
Yep.
then I'm going to put that as my highest priority. I'm not going to take the bait.
Yep.
I'm not going to pick up that package.
Yep.
It's going to be a mess. I'm not going to do
Yeah.
that. I'm going to love. And I'm going to recognize, again, coming
Yep.
back to, the person, and that's different than the fight that's not against
Yeah.
flesh and blood.
And let me clarify too that as therapists, you're a psychologist. Our job is to work towards equality, and it is to challenge the norms of what some people believe sometimes. And so it's perfectly okay. I've challenged a lot of people on a lot of problematic beliefs, including racism, in my sessions. There's a time and place for that. And I think in a therapy setting, we have to clarify that that's a little bit different than maybe what you might do with a friend. But even with a friend, I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to get them thinking. That is 100% of the time way more effective than telling them my opinion about what they just said, because oftentimes that provokes offense in them, and now we're disconnected.
Right.
Now we don't have any influence with each other.
And asking, like, do I have influence with this person? Have they invited me to speak into
Yeah.
their life?
Yep.
If the answer is no, maybe you don't.
Question it at least.
Yeah. That's good.
All right, this was good stuff. Thank you so much for being here today,
Oh, yes,
April.
my
Wow, it was
pleasure.
wonderful. If people want to follow you on social media or anything, do you want to give a quick plug for that? Do you have
I would
or a
say
website,
the website's probably the easiest way to
Okay.
find me. And just because Minitree is hard to say and spell, go to draprilspeaks.com. That's the
Okay.
easiest way to find me.
Dr. April
draprilspeaks.com.
Okay.
And that'll be a place to get connected in, and
Gotcha.
email, phone number, all of that kind of good stuff
Okay.
is there. And would love to hear from folks.
Yeah. And as always, like us and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, all that stuff. Email me or comment your questions, your concerns. We might get some really good stuff as a result of this episode. We're
I hope
happy
so.
to field some questions. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Yes.